Hello, my name is Abby Mickey, and this is the Wheel Talk podcast, and I'm here with friends to talk about women's professional road cycling. Loren Rowney is my co-host today. Loren, hello.
G'day everyone. It's probably been a few weeks since you heard my voice, so good to be back again.
I love your shirt.
Thank you. Shout out to Iris.
Yeah, Iris, the fan corner.
Yep. I picked this up at the Tour de France Femme in 2024 when it went that stage from Valkenburg to Liège. Very cool t-shirt.
That was a good one. Yeah, I remember looking at the map the night before and being like, how do we make it? And there was no way to make it to the start, the corner, and the finish. But someday we're going to be there.
Oh yeah, this year looked wild on the mountain. So I'm curious to see if they're going to do a WorldTour version. And of course, Abby's going to ride up WorldTour next year. I've done it.
Really?
I only needed to do it once. I'm never doing it again.
Hey, I raced up it.
Oh, well, there you go. It's nothing new
and
for
I
you.
remember just racing up it. And I was looking at the kilometer markers it can't possibly still be 8K to the top.
Yeah. It's just not, I don't know. I mean, the combination of me being unfit, if any of the listeners remember this conversation in the summer, it was that crazy heat wave that went through Europe. It was 40 degrees that day, and I just didn't particularly enjoy that climb. It was super busy and just, I don't know, it just feels never ending because it's a lot of long straight roads. Straighter.
Yes. Well, we'll get there. We'll do it. Speaking of big races, we are so excited about our guest today on the podcast. Anyone who listens to the podcast knows how much Loren and Gracie and I talk about development in the women's professional peloton and how fast the sport is moving, the highs and lows of that, especially when it comes to the lower levels of sport and lower level races as well. So we are absolutely thrilled to get someone who knows a lot more about it on the podcast today. We've got Natascha Knaven-den Ouden on the podcast to talk about development in women's professional cycling. And this is something that you know a lot about.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I've created a team since 2018, so I'm in for a lot of years, and I've seen the growth, but I've seen also the lows from it.
You talk a lot on your social media about development, which is one of the reasons I wanted to pull you into the podcast, because I think that we are coming from a one side of the development mindset where all of us who are on the podcast have our own experiences with the sport before the live coverage kicked in. And I think that can, for me, that's really the turning point of when the sport started to become what it is today, is when we could actually watch all the races. And that was only 5 years ago, which is crazy to think about how far we've come in 5 years. I mean, it was only 6 years ago that we were, following huge races like Liège-Bastogne-Liège on Twitter because there was no live coverage. So in the last 5 years, we've seen just this massive amount of growth. And I think it's really exciting in a lot of ways. And we talk about that every week, but it's also really worrying in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of things that are being missed in the rapid fight to kind of make the sport the same as the men's in a lot of ways and make it profitable and make it all of these things. It's leaving behind a whole lot of people that would be the future of the sport. And so you have so many good points that you outline on your social media, and obviously you're part of the development process with the Next Gen team. So I wanted to talk to you about all of these things.
Yeah, it would be great. It's nice that it resonates after several years of telling about it and try to convince people that it's going the wrong way. Thank you for asking me.
It's easy to look at where we are now and where we were 5 years ago and be like, oh my gosh, we are in such a good place. And in a lot of ways, I think it's true. We're one of the few women's sports where women have salaries that they can, their families can live off of. We're one of the few sports that allows, women to have babies mid-career, which that is kind of its own I think, conversation, because I do think that that's very focused on the top riders having babies and not so much some teams wouldn't be so open to domestiques, for example, stepping away for a year. But that's a whole other thing. But like in a lot of ways, women's cycling is a lot of sports could learn a lot from women's cycling, but the growth is so fast. And I think that's one of the main things that you have talked about, is just how fast the sport is growing is not necessarily a good thing.
No, it really is, because what I always say is when you build a house, you don't start with the roof. You start with a solid foundation, and then you build the walls, and then you start with the roof. But what I see now, there was a wooden house that was called women's cycling. And mainly the UCI was starting to build solar panels on it and heavier tiles on it, but didn't look if the walls or the foundation could bear it. And what you see now is there are massive cracks underneath the roof now, because the continental level has almost no calendar anymore. Because in the beginning, when women's cycling was so booming, still booming, and of course that is really terrific what is happening, but underneath that roof, the calendar is decreasing because of the organizers. They wanted to have a few years ago the bigger names, and now can't pay them anymore. They fold due to financial pressure, and so the continental teams and bigger club teams, they have no calendar anymore. And with no calendar, there's no exposure anymore. So there are no sponsors. I have an example of a Belgian club team with a new rule from the UCI that it's not allowed anymore to race in WorldTour races. There were sponsors saying, "Oh yeah, but we pull ourselves out now because we don't have the the return on investment anymore. Less money." Then they had to say, okay, then we do less riders because we can't pay them all anymore. And then there are less riders who can develop. So it's a circle, and that's not good. It really goes too fast where men's cycling had 30 years to grow to where it is now. It's with women in 5 years. And what you see now, it's slowly, it's also implemented in men's cycling, that there are teams folding and the calendar is decreasing. So Alex Carrera, that rider's agent, yesterday also called out for a warning to the UCI. We have to do something with it, also with a decreasing calendar on the men's side.
That's an interesting point that he would call it out, and I definitely respect him as an agent. But I don't want to talk too much about the men, but on the men's side, I guess the issue there is, it's been spoken about a lot, the differences in budget. We're seeing that in the women's side too, in the World Tour, but the differences are so huge that's why they've been having issues with riders just dropping out of contracts, because bigger teams can just simply pay whatever to buy them, and the other teams can't keep up. And funny enough that he has some of the biggest riders in the world on those huge contracts. So I think it's a bit funny. But I think there's so many points to touch on here that I wonder if we circle back. I just want to learn a little bit more about your involvement with Next Gen, and that actually ties in nicely to the development of women's cycling and what we've seen. Because when we think back to 2018, Next Gen was more than just an under-19s team. You had a continental team that was very successful and did a great job of actually nurturing young talent and bringing them through the ranks. Then those riders went off and signed the bigger contracts, we'll say. And it was a system that has worked for a really long time. There's a lot of continental teams that are very proud of this fact and have no ambition necessarily to be a World Tour team, but to serve that development and growth level, we'll call it. Like another team that comes to mind is Coop Repsol. So I think if we think back to 2018 and how things have progressed and how you've decided to even step back from the elite side and focus on the under 19 level, because I started as a rider agent this year, so I'm pretty new to this field. I have a couple of under 19s, and I think if we even just start there, the pressure on under 19s now compared to a few years ago it's crazy. The need and want to train as an elite level athlete, I think is a real concerning pressure right now for these young riders. I have one athlete who was only training 10 hours a week because she's very academic, still performed exceptionally well, but not well enough to get a look in any team. So she felt like she failed in a sense, even though she walked away with a couple of junior world track medals.
I have to admit that a few of my posts were about that. Because the pressure on the junior level is really, really high. And what you see now is that some juniors signed for WorldTour, but on the other side, they couldn't sign for a development team because they weren't good enough. So then I say, then you have a pretty good agent that you could sign on the WorldTour level. And that's a concerning circle, I think, because those riders are too young to go on the WorldTour level because next year they have to race all the WorldTour races except one. So, and all the WorldTour calendar is really big, so yeah, these races are too high. That's a too high level. And then they drop out after 2 years. And where do they sign? You see Loren from BC. She signed for now for a development team. And I think that's very good for her because that's a level that is good for her to develop further. But you see a lot of riders and you can predict for other riders that signed last year for a WorldTour team, you can predict the same. But it's the pressure on junior level, what you say, is really high because they all think they have to perform like an elite rider. But it is because of folding of smaller teams, because of the decreasing calendar. And the stepping out of sponsors. It's really difficult. And that's why I called out a few years ago already. The WorldTour is drying up if we don't do something with a calendar or a development league, what I proposed. But that proposal is already for 2 years with the UCI, but they don't do anything with it.
I mean, you see, like, there's of course always juniors that are going to make that jump and be successful, but like not every junior can be Kat Ferguson, and kind of expecting that of riders. Like we have like the situation with Izzy Sharp where she rode for Little Trek for 2 seasons and cut her contract a year short to go back to a development program, because especially like if you go into a World Tour team as an 18-year-old, you just don't have there's almost no chance you have the experience you need with the way that the peloton is going at the moment. It's the fastest that women's cycling has ever been. The racing is the hardest ever. Every single year we have experienced riders like Amanda Spratt calling the Giro the hardest Giro she's ever done, and the juniors, where the sport used to be a little bit more level, I think. Now there's a huge gap, but there's still the same expectation. There's been no adjustment for the younger riders coming into the sport. And the problem is there's no like U23 calendar for there to be a jump from juniors to U23 and then into the World Tour. And that doesn't exist on the men's side as well. So it's not like the women are the only ones kind of being overlooked. But because there are so few women for World Tour teams to pull from, or at least they think so. Like a lot of the World Tour teams are only looking at mainly looking at juniors, up-and-coming juniors to develop. But then they don't have the infrastructure to properly develop those riders. And especially if they're pulling riders from like non-European nations, making them live in Europe, they're just setting them up for failure. And that also puts a ton of pressure on like DSs and stuff to make sure that the riders that they have, they have a 18-year-old who has to move from Australia to Spain and has like never lived away from home. And the DS then has to hold their hand while they figure out how to buy groceries and also be a professional athlete in a sport that is rapidly evolving.
Yeah, I think it's become a numbers game for a lot of people in the sport, for rider agents, for teams. It's kind of like when you take a young rider like that, you can sign them for a relatively low amount because they're a young rider, unless, I don't know, they've already presented like Kat Ferguson to be absolutely exceptional. Maybe she signs a bit higher, but it's just that's sometimes how I look at it, that maybe they will be that next big thing. And you want to try and get them now, and you want to invest in them and try and keep them on the team so they stay there. But there's never a guarantee that a rider that you invest 3-4 years in is going to stay there and not jump ship to another team. So for me, it's, in football, it's different because they have those transfer fees. So teams actually just make money out of having athletes because they just trade them. But it doesn't work that way in cycling. So yeah, it's quite problematic. And I feel sometimes we have enough riders, and that's definitely something I have understood this year. There are so many riders in the market, but it's like the older ones, anyone over 30, are overlooked, even though they're mature, reliable, possibly have had a career before. They'll perform their duties. Some of them come into the sport so much later, like Lotte Class. You don't know what they can still do on the bike because they're still young in a sense. I mean, Annemiek van Vleuten, I always come back to this, but she could have continued at a very high level if she wanted to, because women just are built for an endurance. And we can go.
Look at Mavi.
Exactly, Mavi. Brilliant example. Tour de France win this year, phenomenal season. But it's so hard to try and convince teams to take those riders, whereas they want to take a gamble on a junior. So sometimes I'm hitting my head against the wall trying to understand, how do we figure this out? And we always go back to our time, Natascha, where it was definitely a different situation in terms of the landscape of cycling in general. But I think that Gracie and I were talking about it on a recent podcast, those 1.2 races, there was just so many of them on the calendar, particularly in Belgium and the Netherlands, that you had those opportunities. Even if you had a rough time in the spring at some of the bigger races, you could always fall back on those races to get your confidence. It was a better mix as well. So you didn't lose yourself and want to throw it in and just say, no, I'm shit. Well, in actual fact, you're just still developing, and Gracie always said to me, you have to look at it as this is like your internship, and you've got to do a certain number of years as an intern before you become mid-management and then senior.
Most of the girls, they have the hormonal balance from their 25. They're still developing. So Kat Ferguson is an exception, I think. But also the question mark is, how long can she grow or sustain on this level? Because she is already good. But the fact is that she was training like a pro when she was a junior. And she's exceptional, and she's very mature for her age, I think. When you hear her talking in interviews, she's very mature. But at 18, you are still a kid. And when you have to jump to WorldTour level, you are a kid in a mature environment, and you are still developing. And a lot of those young girls are mentally not prepared for it.
I always think of Little Trek and how they took a gamble on 5 juniors coming into the team, and really only one has succeeded in a way. Only one has kind of been able to slowly over a couple years progress, and then this year get results, and that's Isabella Holmgren, who is another standout young talent in
but
the
also
same
multidisciplined.
Yeah, exactly. She's splitting across mountain bike and cyclocross as well, and her sister's also doing the same. So she's also very accomplished on the mountain bike side. But then they also have, one junior who stepped down, a couple who have not been not really been at the level that they needed to support the team, and would probably be exceptional riders on a smaller team, but because it's one of the biggest teams in the world, they have so much expectation and pressure on them that they shouldn't have at their age.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a plan for 2027. I'm not going to tell it, but I have a huge plan.
When can we ask you about it, Natascha?
Yeah.
When are you going to reveal the plan?
I think in March or something when I've rolled it out. But it's a really it's totally new in cycling because I reinvent our project every year to lift it to a new level and be a benchmark every year to other development projects. We are copied so many times, and that's really good. So I really hope to do that in the next couple of years, because in the past everyone thought that we were doing this, my husband and me, for our kids, but that isn't true. Our kids are all elites now. I'm still in the junior ranks to develop that part.
I do love that you have had your kids go through your program and now get to watch them race on other teams, and it's really cool.
Yeah, it's also better because when they were in AG Insurance Soudal, when I was the owner there and team manager, for my eldest, it was really not good. Emotionally and mentally, she crashed because she really thought that she had to prove herself over and over again. So she quit by the end of 23, and now she's back in the peloton again in a continental team, and she wants to step up again. She's 25 now, and she really loves what she's doing, and that's really good. I think that's also a thing that a lot of youngsters identify themselves with what they are doing, are a cyclist instead of they are doing cyclist. And I had a chat with a coach yesterday. And about top sport at junior level. He said the problem is that they think they are top sporters, and that coaches are coaching top sporters, But these are children doing high level sport because it's not already top sport. Top sport is on the elite level, not a junior level. It's high level sport, and that's a really big difference in approaching and coaching those children and keep the balance.
You've talked about the importance of like junior riders continuing with their schooling and putting school first over cycling.
Because you can create better athletes. Then there was a case study in the UK about this that proved it. So,
which I believe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better life balance. And I will admit I was one of those people who had my identity wrapped up in being an athlete from a very, very, very young age. And that message was just constantly pushed at me. So when I quit very, very spontaneously, then all of a sudden on Friday, you're an athlete. You quit Friday night and Saturday morning, you wake up and you're no longer an athlete. And then what? What do you have? And it was years of struggle. And I think there are probably a few people that identify in a different way to my story. But I really like that you push for balance and education, because you just don't know. You could end up with an injury or a heart condition, or anything can happen. So to have something else and to actually have friends outside of the sport, I think is important. To try and still have those relationships with people at university or school friends from when you were younger or something like that is really important. But I'm curious, with Next Gen, how do you approach all these topics that we're talking about? You've got this young batch of young riders coming through, their second year under 19. How do you approach the season and what comes after that? Also considering that now we know the continental level calendar is reduced greatly. There are less teams on that level because they simply cannot afford to do it. To your earlier point, pitching to sponsors, why should sponsors get involved with this level of racing when TV coverage is not guaranteed and races aren't guaranteed?
You mean for the continental level or junior level?
Continental level.
Upper continental level. Yeah, that's really a struggle, because the old-fashioned way of thinking in companies where mostly men are in the leading position, they don't see it. They want exposure on television because they want, in the Tour of Flanders, their name on television for several minutes, because they can say, oh, this is where we put our money in. I think the approach has to be that you encourage and support young women to go to a higher rank. One example from an old sponsor, the first team from Anna van der Breggen. There was a steel manufacturer, and he says every year we do a barbecue with clients and employees, and every year Anna is coming to our barbecue because she's loyal and thankful that she could start in that team. And that was the beginning of her career, and that's also an example of loyalty, but also investing on a long term. You invest in a career, and it's not always the exposure on television that you get, but you can get it on social media nowadays. Yesterday, I sent all our sponsors a jersey from this team and from our team, and I put a card in it, and I said, thank you for all your support, because this jersey is a symbol of where we can develop our riders and where they can go. And one of them called me, and I sent him the Belgium Championship jersey. So I want an autograph, because when Auke is in 5 years winning maybe a stage on the Tour de France Femme, I can say, I really discovered this girl, So they are proud. And I think you have to tell the story and bring sponsors in with this story, with this mindset, with this feeling of proudness to develop the next future stars. And maybe when the growth of a company, they can step in further, It's but you have to always to look on the long term and not on the short term. And what you see now in women's cycling, there's only looked on the short term. There's investing in a junior, throwing them in the World Tour for 2 years, and you didn't deliver. Oh yeah, we take another one. So I have a rider of 27, not in my team of course, but in the club team, and I know her and I saw her riding. She's racing just for 2 years, and she's really on a high level. She's very mature. She's working full time as a producer on Dutch television, and I proposed her to several teams, and they say, but she's already 27. Yeah, she's but mature. Maybe she's the next Kim Lecour, So I see in her a very, very, potentially very good rider. Why don't you sign her instead of a junior?
I see this from also from riders in the peloton who are established on World Tour teams, where they're looking at who their team is signing for next season, and they're like, oh my gosh, juniors that I'm going to have to hold their hand for half of the season or the whole season, when there are riders that they know would be a good fit, and they know are looking for a contract, but teams are but they're 33, which means that when we sign them, their first year, they'll be 34, and it's too old. And it's I know, so I've heard from so many riders just how frustrated they are with teams not taking older, experienced riders seriously, from both the up and coming point, because there are so many incredible riders who came into the sport late and did incredible things. And women, physiologically, they always say that we peak later. And so for a long time, I remember it being a problem of teams not having enough young riders, back when they had that rule that there needed to be a certain number of young riders on a team to kind of balance the team. And it's not just, us that are concerned about about something like this. I've heard it from the riders as well, where they're like, oh my gosh, this rider who is 28, she's amazing. She's been fighting for so long for a spot. She's good enough. But they would rather sign, like a team would rather sign a speed skater who's never raced on the road before, but is exceptional at speed skating, and they have numbers. And so they think that they'll be able to translate that over, and then they, can't ride in a peloton.
It's dangerous peloton because they can't race, and you only learn racing by racing, because cycling is one of the sports, most exceptional sports, that is only learned by racing, by doing it, and not only by training. You can push the numbers, but if you can't race, you will never be a good rider. Never. That is what it is with racing. You have to love it. You have influence from the outside where you have no influence on. So you can only experience and learn from it by doing it, by actually racing, and not by training and going on Swift, because a peloton is more dangerous because of all those riders who can't steer and move within the peloton.
That's why the Dutch are so good, is because they race from a young age and they know how to ride in a peloton from a very young age. And it's like one of the things that, has as a nation that they stand out. And there are other nations that are catching up, like Italy, I think, is incredible. Switzerland, like they've got some really incredible riders that are coming through, and it's in the depth of the national team, that you can kind of pick out which of these nations have riders that have spent a lot of time honing the skill of riding a bike in a peloton and over varying terrains and in crosswinds and stuff. And then like the US is really bad at. They have like incredibly strong riders. Like Faulkner is incredible. She is like a once in a generation numbers talent. But then, crashes every single day of the Tour de France because she was thrown into the sport and no one developed her ability to ride in a peloton. And she can learn that. And she is learning that. I think she's getting better. But it's really interesting to me, the difference between like some nations and and teams as well, how they take a rider who doesn't have that skill set, and if they spend time and energy and effort teaching a rider how to navigate a peloton, sending them to kermesses, and how it's like, that's what's investing in a rider. Like that's how you invest in a rider for the future, is like teaching them how to ride a bike, teaching them how to race a bike, teaching them how to win. You can't just look at numbers and be like, well, they're going to be the next Van Vleuten because they have these numbers.
Exactly. But in the United States, you have CCB Racing, who's doing a really good job.
Yeah, they're incredible. Tim. Shout out to Tim.
He's always asking me for advice. And can you come over? Abby, you were talking about the Netherlands, but the Netherlands has a really serious problem. Because all of the countries around the Netherlands are catching up because of the fact that there are less and less races for youth riders. We have just 92 juniors, 92 for next year. And the level is not really high. It's really devastating what is happening. And I predicted that also 5 years ago in a Danish magazine. Because he said, you are developing in the Netherlands a lot of good riders. No, the riders are developing themselves because of the youth races. But the youth races are also decreasing because of all the rules that the Dutch government has.
Yeah, road closures and it's becoming really problematic, isn't it?
It's really problematic indeed. And now the National Federation asks those 5 UCI races that are organized in the Netherlands for more in 5 years, the same amount of financial organization fee for the National Federation, the same as the men. But it's not possible because the money isn't there, We are all pushing in the financial equality for men and women, but the money isn't there yet, because equality is for centuries and centuries already in the mindset of people. Also with women, you can't change that in one generation. And that's also a thing where the whole development in women's cycling goes wrong. It's more the equality in financial ways than in chances. And you see that with the decreasing calendar on continental level.
Yeah, I pulled a quote from your Instagram about the Netherlands and Conti teams, and that because of the mandatory salary rules, there's no Conti teams for the women in the Netherlands. And salaries without races are meaningless. Without a race calendar, development disappears.
Yeah, exactly. Because development is not about salary. Development is getting races, getting a professional staff that can lift you to another level. And it has to do with material, That's development, but not for an 18, 19 years old a salary, because they are mostly living at home. They don't have a mortgage to do. So, and I tried to explain that a few years ago to the Cyclist Alliance, who put that mandatory with the National Federation. But the result is eventually that there are no continental teams because it costs too much. You don't find sponsors on that level who pay you 500,000 euros for a team. And then because it's not about the 500 euros, it's also about the insurances which goes around those 500 euros. So a rider costs you not 500 euros. A rider costs you 1,500 then, and that's the same at pro continental level. That's also a mindset that people don't understand. The minimum wage on continental level is 20,000 euros. That's good. That's good money for an 18, 19 years old who goes there. But for the team, it's not 20,000, it's 35. So you need a lot of budget to get 14, 15, 16 riders. So what you see now is the wages, the salaries from riders are going sky high. And, but the budgets from teams are not going higher in that speed. So you see now that WorldTour teams are decreasing their amount of riders to 14 or 16 instead of 22. Human Powered Health is the only team who has 22 riders.
And going into a season where they have to race every WorldTour race, by the time we get to, it's going to be full gas until the Tour, and as soon as the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift ends, we're going to see bare bones teams showing up to races.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have maybe 4 riders. It's not allowed, but then they have 4 riders on the starting line, or maybe 5, and 2 of them will start. They have the DNF after 5K. That's what's going to happen.
Which is not good for the racing, right? Because if you're a World Tour race and you're investing all this money in it, let's think of the races at the back end of the calendar. And then you have a peloton of, 70 rolling around. We saw this at Simac Ladies Tour. The quality of that field, even though it was a race that was always late in the calendar, was so high. And everyone turned up for it. But now it's kind of like, falling away just because teams, to your point, riders, by that point in the season, just aren't able to show up. And I do wonder, with these team rosters reducing and the teams that have now signed more young riders, what's going to happen to them? Because they're also, there's 28 races on the World Tour calendar, but they'll also try and show up to those point pros and 0.1 races to try and get some extra points too. So I know with teams that have development teams, they've made a conscious decision to reduce the number of development riders. So then they can drop a couple of World Tour riders down and say, send only 3 development riders, but 3 World Tour riders to a pro race. And then those development riders just end up doing the first half of the race as a bottle bitch or something like that, and don't develop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a bottle bitch. Yeah.
Sorry.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it. No,
no disregard to those riders, but for me, that's worrying because, you go and do the internship years and then you don't show yourself. And then I have a situation with one of my riders. She's a great rider and no one wants to sign her.
Yeah, because you still need to have results. There is a part of the sport that's being carved out for domestiques, but for riders who haven't aren't in the World Tour yet, who haven't shown themselves to be a good teammate or whatever, you still need results. And especially like, yeah, a lot of the Devo riders, like they have no opportunity anymore. And I think about the race organizers as well, because like if you look at the tail end of the women's season next year, you've got the Tour of Holland and the Lloyd's Tour of Britain, 2 races that have traditionally put a lot into the women's peloton. And they're the very, very tail end of the season, and they're going to get like nothing when it comes to riders showing up for their races. And it's a real shame. So it's like everyone is kind of suffering at this point. Like, yes, the racing is phenomenal. We have some incredible women coming through. They're making good money. There's a lot of really, really good things. But like race promoters who aren't ASO are suffering. Teams are suffering, riders are suffering, like more injuries and illness than ever before because riders are just being raced into the ground and the training level is so much higher now. And it's like everything is growing, but the cost is too high. Like not just money cost, but like the cost to women, to people's well-being and the well-being of the sport.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we are doing with Next Year Racing with our juniors. We have created and written down 12 learning pathways in a nice book. And it's on the mental side, the mechanical side, because they know how to clean a bike and how, when it's going in crash mode, how you get it off, stuff like that. The nutrition ways for us, very, very important. We have Sarah Prowse from Liverpool, and she comes from gymnastics. And she's very determined to teach those youngsters what are the micro and macro nutrition nutrients. Why is it important to eat good fats, and protein, but also enough carbohydrates? Why it is, and what we want to do is create a benchmark with Next Year Racing to create a whole new generation of really healthy athletes. Because the older athletes, that also, I think, are still have problems with eating. They are too lean. They are going in a red S. We were talking about red S already 5 years ago with our team. So all of our riders, Charlotte Kool, Milena de Zoete, Julia Kopecki, they all know, Shadi Bossuit, they all know what red S is because we have taught them already. And that's a really important issues also about menstrual cycle. We are now a test case team for a whole new app on your phone. Nana is creating something. There's 2 really determined people, scientists, who are creating an app to support women with top sporters, but also other women that do sport to eat properly during the menstrual cycle, according to their training load. So that's also something new, and we were talking about that, and that's what we are doing with Next Year Racing. And the step to the elite level is made a bit easier because they know already those things, and they know already how to train and how to balance life, because what we said, we think school is very, very important to have also on the other side a social life. And it's not only focused on cycling, because cycling is a very, very small world. And your own world is also very small when you only focus on cycling. And I think mentally it drains.
I really love this, what you're doing. It's so necessary. And I think it just needs to be copy and pasted, because I'm just thinking of so many young riders I've known myself where you had really normal habit, and then you enter pro cycling and, you're sitting next to some of your heroes now at the breakfast table and you're looking at what they're doing. And then you start picking up weird things like, oh, wow, that person's only eating egg whites or something like that. I don't know. And you're exposed to that. But I'm just thinking, if you've already had the education and you're made aware that, okay, you know, there are going to be some people with this disordered eating habits that maybe, you know, if they're in their 30s, it's something that was a cultural problem with endurance sports that is still lingering. But if you already have that knowledge, to just know that you know what you need to do and have a good support system, I think that's really key to say, you know, I'm starting to struggle now with these intrusive thoughts that maybe I am eating too much bread in the morning or something like that, that you have that network to go back to. And I know a lot of the riders that have been through your program still reference you in their posts when they're very successful. So you need people like yourself and I guess members of the Next Gen team where you can reach out and just know that if you have questions about things that are going on in your current team, you can have the answers that you're looking for, the positive reinforcement that you're doing the right thing. And that's just another part of the problem, I would say. But for me, one of the core problems, it's always going to come back to this business model, the overall business model of cycling. And, you know, I was just reading into how other sports function, and it's always good to go and look at resources that come out of the US, just in terms of how revenue is generated for other sports and why there is consistent investment from private equity firms and such, because, you know, ticket sales, concessions, game day revenue, advertising, media rights, player transfers, all these things work into the models of other sports. And cycling doesn't have the same revenue model. And that filters all the way down, right? Because if I think just of the football leagues, even here in Belgium, I went to my first football game. It was like a tier 3 game, but I was like astounded at how much money was still being invested in that, even though most people wouldn't know who those players were because they're developing them on those different tiers. So eventually there'll be that multi-million euro player.
Exactly. Yeah, I think cycling, I was talking with the husband of Leontien van Moorsel a few years ago, and he said, Natascha, cycling globally with men and women together, I think it was 2 years ago, that we had that conversation. He said, I think it's 500 million. That's this kind of, a little piece of what's going around in football or Formula One, you know, and we're doing it so wrong. The whole business model is so rigid. I think it's something that UCI can do about it, but they are also so rigid in their mindset. I really think that. So what we do now with Next Year Racing is also I called a university. And they put in their last year marketing students. I have 2 groups who are doing research now for a community model. How can you have a passive financial support, like passive, and have to inspire a whole new generation of people to go also on the bike? You know, can we do something with that, with the whole community model, and look into another sport like football or the NBA or I don't know, Formula One, and create a whole new sponsor model, a whole new business model to get companies into you to have a whole an earning model for yourself, for the team. So maybe that's really breaking for cycling. I think other teams also looking into it. I think because the business model in cycling is not good, but we with women's cycling can do it the other way.
This is a brilliant point. I think other sports and other industries are really, really good. I'm thinking of a different example, but I know that the whole cycling advocacy world, so getting people on bikes commuting, they have work closely with people from the automotive industry to understand how that works. And that sounds really weird, but the knowledge that they've gained from how the automotive industry has functioned, for example, leasing, that's a huge thing to drive car sales, is for businesses to offer leasing to their employees. Like, what a nice incentive. So I think with cycling, to your point about being too insular, we really need to bring in people from everywhere else and help solve this problem. So I think this is a really cool starting point, approaching a university. But I think there is a solution there somewhere. It's just figuring out how we're going to do it. And I know a big problem is as well with the media rights and the issue of none of that money being distributed to the teams. I don't know how that will ever change when the ASO has done the ASO things for however long.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But maybe we can start in women's cycling with a development league,
Great segue.
Really good segue. I wanted to like end on a high by talking about your ideas for the development league because it's so good. And like, I think something that the maybe like cyclocross does quite well actually is having like a cohesive World Cup calendar. And I talked last week with Tiffany Cromwell about gravel and how gravel has this opportunity to have like a league that people can follow that the riders go to. And women's cycling kind of used to have like the World Cup, but like having a development league makes so much sense. And I love the ideas that you've put forward about a development league for women's cycling.
Yeah, because Red Bull, I mentioned Red Bull as an example. You have Red Bull TV. So you have your broadcasting already, and instead of investing in a team or in the best riders of the world, you invest in a whole peloton of riders, the next big talent. And you have the same like the Gatorade League in the NBA. That's where the idea came from. Yeah, that's also Gatorade invested in that, but it's also on TV, the development league for the NBA. And it's, I think it's a really brilliant plan. The races are there, the riders are there.
I also think, Natascha, to that point is, it's the youth that have the finger on the pulse when it comes to social media and what's trending and building their own brands. So if you can tie all that in, you're probably going to get a whole bunch of young people watching these young stars.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the next future stars, but they have something to bring,
Mm-hmm.
Another hashtag from our team is inspire before you win.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, you can inspire before you can inspire that youngster from 9 years old. They don't want to be the Demi Vollering. No, they want to be the next Anna Meuse, maybe, stuff like that. And I think that's very important to create also new riders who have dreams. And that's the thing that Demi always say. Yeah? It all starts with dreaming. That's what I shoot back to her. Yeah, but it doesn't have to stay with that, because when we grow women's cycling in the speed that we are doing now, it all stays with dreaming for a lot of.
I mean, I love the kind of bare bones that you've put forward with the development league. And for those who haven't seen it, it's building on what already exists. We have, a few 0.2, 0.1 and national level races that can be elevated and put on a higher stage, given, if Red Bull was to sponsor something like this, then they would have the live coverage that they so desperately want, that teams want and riders want to be recognized. Races keep an identity, but join their league, which again, like that kind of reminds me of what Gravel Earth has done, where they have individual races that have signed on to be part of a league, eligible to club and Conti teams, but not the top 100 riders, which I love that. Like, you want the Conti teams to be able to race these races, but you don't want there to be a situation where you have like the Conti teams associated with WorldTour teams and the top riders can, ride on those teams for one race and smother the race, because it's a huge problem that the lower level races have the WorldTour riders come up and it's basically a WorldTour race. And then like what kind of development can happen for the other riders in the race when they're just trying to survive. And you've also laid out how the league itself can grow from 8 to 10 races across 4 to 5 countries to eventually grow with the base that you talk about all the time into 20 to 25 races. And it's important, I think, for like the UCI to recognize the league, because they have such a huge stranglehold on road cycling that nothing can really survive without them, and nothing can everything is tied together. It's like the human body in a lot of ways, cycling, and everything needs to be under this umbrella. But you've laid forth such an idiot-proof way to make development in the sport a linear pathway that is easy to understand and like actually not that hard to implement.
No, it's not hard, because what I say, the races are there, the riders are there, the organizers are there. You need just one umbrella and one big financer. Like,
it's new branding. That's all it is, actually.
Yeah, actually it is. But it's also maybe interesting for Lidl.
Yeah.
Or Liv.
Yeah.
Lidl really wants to be a big name, and I mean they sponsor like every Lidl sponsors like.
But also the fact that they're present in so many countries, that's where it makes sense if you've got such a multinational corporation like that. Yeah.
Lidl. Sorry, my husband is sitting there correcting me. Lidl,
but Lidl. We in the Netherlands or in Belgium we say it all when we say Lidl, and we go to the supermarket and we go to the Lidl. We say, yeah, I go to the Lidl, because it sounds more posh.
Yeah, that's true.
And I mean, it would also be great for like you have Turingen, right, that wanted to be in the World Tour so that they could get the top riders and get the recognition. But if there was a league like this that had live coverage and had like a core mission that was to develop these riders and put them into the Tour de France Femmes Swift, put them into the Vuelta, like put them into the bigger races, then a race like Turingen would feel value from being part of a league like this that isn't, okay, the only way to survive in women's cycling is to be part of the World Tour.
The other way around now, it's the only way to survive is getting in the Red Bull League. Yeah. I think a lot of races that existed and folded will come back, because it's interesting. You are part of a bigger whole, you know, like Gracie or Krasnalipa to Femina, those 0.2. They are very proud that they brought big names like Marianne Vos, who won her first race also. They are very proud of it, but they also can be part of that league. That's really good.
Great races as well. Fond memories from Czech. Really good.
I loved that race. That race was so much fun. The pinwheel style where you didn't have to change hotels every night. Oh, yeah. And we were staying with this like incredible family that we're just so excited to have us there. The U.S. national team. Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, it's been amazing talking to you. I think that we could probably keep talking for another hour because there's so much knowledge that you have about the sport on so many different levels. And it's, there's so much that can be done. I think like there's so much potential in women's cycling, and a lot of people are really starting to see that. But we need people to understand that there's potential in every level of women's cycling, and it's not just the top. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for doing everything that you do.
Yeah, now that I know that you live not so far, it would be lovely to get a coffee with you sometime over the spring.
Yeah, Bruges is, I think, an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that far. Yeah, I would love that. Thank you.
Great.
This episode was produced, edited, and mixed by Will Jones at Red Bricks Media.